My wife said we should split everything since we both make good money, but she wasn't laughing when I took her literally. Veronica always prided herself on being practical. When we got married 5 years ago, she insisted we keep separate bank accounts, split all bills down the middle, and maintain our financial independence. Modern couples don't need antiquated ideas about sharing money. She'd lecture anyone who'd listen. I went along with it. She made 6 figures as a pharmaceutical sales rep while I pulled in decent money as a software engineer. We could afford our lifestyle easily. The downtown loft, the German cars, the weekend trips to wine country. The problem started when Veronica got promoted to regional manager. Suddenly, she was working late constantly, traveling to conferences, and spending money like water. New designer clothes appeared weekly. She traded her BMW for a Tesla. When I asked about the expenses, she'd snap, "I earn my money. I can spend it how I want." Fair enough. Except our joint expenses kept climbing while my contribution stayed the same. The grocery bills doubled when she started buying organic everything. Our utility costs skyrocketed when she insisted on keeping the place at 68 degrees year-round. She enrolled us in premium streaming services, upgraded our internet, and hired a cleaning service. We should split everything equally, she'd remind me whenever I questioned a bill. That's what modern couples do. 3 months ago, I discovered why her spending had increased. Her laptop was open on the kitchen counter, displaying a hotel confirmation for 2 people in Napa Valley. The same weekend, she told me she was attending a mandatory training seminar. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I started documenting everything. Credit card statements showed expensive dinners for 2 at restaurants she claimed were client meetings. Her phone records revealed hundreds of calls to a number registered to Derek, her supposed business mentor. Last week, she announced she wanted a divorce. "We're just not compatible anymore," she said over morning coffee as casually as discussing the weather. "But don't worry. Since we kept everything separate, this'll be simple. We'll just split the joint assets and go our separate ways." She had it all figured out. She'd keep the loft since it was in her name. I'd take my car. We'd divide the furniture and call it even. She was so confident, so matter-of-fact about dismantling our life. That's when I decided to take her advice, literally. I started Sunday morning while she was at her yoga class, the one where Derek apparently also practiced. Room by room, I measured and divided everything exactly in half. The dining table got a chalk line down the center. I used a hacksaw on the couch, making sure each piece was precisely equal. The 60-inch TV required careful calculation, but I managed to split it right down the middle. The kitchen took the most work. Every plate, cup, and piece of silverware got divided. I even split the coffee maker, though I kept the side with the heating element. When Veronica returned, she stood in the doorway, staring at our perfectly bisected living space. "What the hell did you do?" she whispered. "Exactly what you suggested," I replied, holding up the lease agreement I'd been hiding. "Split everything equally. Modern couples and all that." Her face went pale as she read the document. The loft wasn't in her name. It was in both of ours, with me as the primary leaseholder since my credit score was higher. "By the way," I added, "Derek called while you were out. Something about the photos I sent him of his car. Apparently someone split that in half too." The color drained completely from her face. She dropped her yoga mat and rushed to the window overlooking the parking garage. Even from our 7th floor unit, you could see Derek's pristine white Tesla Model S, or rather, what remained of it. I'd used an angle grinder to cut it lengthwise, creating 2 perfectly equal halves. "You're insane," she breathed, turning back to me with wild eyes. "I'm thorough," I corrected. "That's what made me good at debugging code. That's what made me good at documenting your affair, and that's what made me good at following your instructions to the letter." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I watched her scroll through what I assumed were increasingly frantic texts from Derek. The poor guy had probably arrived at the office this morning to find his $60,000 car turned into an art installation. "This is vandalism," she said, her voice rising. "Destruction of property. I could have you arrested." "For what? Splitting our shared assets equally, like you insisted?" I gestured around the destroyed living room. "Everything here is half yours, half mine. I made sure to keep exact measurements." She stared at the dining table where we'd shared so many meals, now sporting a clean chalk line down its center. The left half had 3 chairs, the right half had 3 chairs. I'd even split the salt and pepper shakers. "The car isn't ours," she said desperately. "No, but Derek made it my business when he started sleeping with my wife." I showed her my phone screen. "I've got 3 months of evidence. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even photos you posted on Instagram from places you told me were work events. Amazing how many of those locations match Derek's credit card statements." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She'd always been so careful, so calculating. The realization that I'd been equally methodical in my investigation clearly hadn't occurred to her. "How did you even get his car?" she asked weakly. "I didn't break into the parking garage, if that's what you're wondering. Derek gave me his spare key last Christmas when you volunteered me to help him move that antique armoire into his apartment. Remember? You said it would be good for me to make friends with your colleagues." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She'd literally handed me the tool of her own downfall. I walked over to what used to be our bookshelf, now 2 smaller bookshelves standing side by side. I pulled out a thick manila folder from behind my half of the books. "I've also prepared a complete financial analysis of our marriage," I continued, opening the folder. "Turns out, when you split everything equally, some interesting patterns emerge." The first page showed a detailed breakdown of our joint expenses over the past 18 months. The numbers told a clear story. While my contributions remained steady, her personal spending had increased by 400%. "The cleaning service you hired?" I covered 70% because you claimed your income was tied up in investments. The grocery bills you insisted we split. You were buying premium everything and dining out 5 nights a week with Derek while I ate the expensive organic meals alone. I flipped to the next page, which showed her individual credit card statements. These are particularly interesting. Every Thursday for the past 6 months, you've charged $150 at Le Bernardin. That's the same restaurant where you and Derek have your weekly mentoring sessions, according to his social media posts. Veronica's face had gone from pale to ashen. She sank onto the remaining half of our sectional sofa, which now looked absurdly unbalanced with its matching piece sitting 3 feet away. I can explain. Please don't. I held up my hand. I've heard enough explanations. What I want to talk about now is practical matters. You said you wanted to split things equally and go our separate ways. I'm just making sure we do exactly that. I pulled out another set of documents. This is the official division of assets prepared according to your specifications. 50-50, right down the middle. The destroyed furniture will be donated to charity. We'll each get a tax write-off for our half. The electronics that no longer function will be recycled responsibly. She looked around at the carnage with growing horror. The 60-inch TV was now 2 30-inch pieces of expensive junk. The dining table would need to be completely rebuilt. Even our wedding photos had been carefully cut in half. She got the left side of each picture. I got the right. This is crazy, she whispered. This is equality, I replied. You've spent 5 years lecturing me about fair splits and financial independence. I'm just applying your principles consistently. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and smiled. Derek's at the hospital, I announced cheerfully. Apparently he had some kind of breakdown when he saw his car. Hyperventilation, according to the paramedics. Veronica jumped up from the couch. I need to go to him. Of course you do. But first we should finish dividing our assets. I walked to the kitchen and opened what used to be our junk drawer. Now 2 junk drawers, contents precisely allocated. I pulled out a keychain with a single key. Your half of the house key. I had it cut this morning. I held up my own key. Mine opens the front door and the mailbox. Yours opens, well, it doesn't open anything useful, but it's exactly half a key. Equal division. She stared at the useless piece of metal in my palm. How am I supposed to get into my own home? Our home, I corrected. And according to the lease agreement, I have the right to change the locks if one tenant becomes a security risk. Bringing men here while your husband is at work definitely qualifies. I discovered that particular detail 3 weeks ago when Derek had left his cologne all over our bathroom. The scent was distinctive. Tom Ford Tobacco Vanille, $300 a bottle. I'd found the receipt in Veronica's purse the same day she claimed to be too tired for dinner because of a migraine. You can't lock me out of my own apartment. Actually, I can. I spoke with our landlord this morning. Mr. Kowalski was very understanding when I explained the situation. Turns out his first wife cheated on him too. He's giving you 72 hours to collect your belongings. I handed her a business card. I've also taken the liberty of contacting a divorce attorney. Patricia Lawson specializes in cases involving infidelity. She's very thorough, almost as thorough as I am. Veronica's hands were shaking as she took the card. She'd always prided herself on being in control, having every angle covered. Finding herself outmaneuvered by her predictable husband was clearly more devastating than losing half our furniture. I never meant for it to happen this way, she said quietly. Which part? The affair or getting caught? She flinched at the directness of the question. Derek and I, it just happened. We were working closely together, spending long hours on the pharmaceutical rollout. Things developed naturally. Nothing about this was natural, I replied. You made calculated decisions every step of the way. You chose to lie to me about where you were going. You chose to use our joint credit card for romantic dinners with another man. You chose to sleep with him in our bed while I was at my mother's funeral. That last detail hit her like a physical blow. She actually staggered backward. How did you? Motion-activated security camera in the bedroom. I installed it after my laptop went missing and thought we might have a break-in problem. Imagine my surprise when I reviewed the footage and found the real security threat. I'd watched that particular video exactly once. Seeing my wife of 5 years with another man in our bed, 3 days after I'd buried my mother, had been educational in ways I never wanted to experience. But it had also crystallized my resolve to handle this situation with surgical precision. I saved you a copy on USB drive, I added, pulling a small device from my pocket. You're half of the evidence. She stared at the drive like it might explode. What do you want from me? She asked desperately. Nothing. You've already given me everything I need. I gestured around the demolished apartment. Clarity, honesty about what our marriage really was, and the motivation to build something better. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Patricia Lawson's office. Excuse me, I said to Veronica, answering the call. Hello, Patricia. Yes, I have all the documentation ready. Financial records, evidence of adultery, division of assets, everything we discussed. I listened for a moment, then smiled. Excellent. I'll be there at 2 o'clock. Yes, I understand that Derek's recent hospitalization strengthens our case significantly. Apparently, destruction of property in a fit of rage suggests unstable character. Veronica's eyes widened. She mouthed, What are you talking about? But I held up a finger. Oh, the car? No, I didn't touch Derek's car. Why would I do something illegal when I have perfectly legal alternatives? I paused, letting that sink in. Yes, I'll bring the security footage from the parking garage. Amazing what you can see with a telephoto lens from our apartment window. I hung up and turned back to my wife. Interesting development. Derek apparently took a crowbar to his own car after discovering it had been cut in half. The security cameras caught him smashing the windows and headlights while screaming about revenge. Very dramatic. Also, very illegal. Veronica sat heavily on her half of the couch. You didn't actually cut his car, did you? Of course not. That would be vandalism. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo. I used a high-end photo editing program to create realistic images of his destroyed car, then sent them to him with a message claiming I'd split everything equally. His guilty conscience did the rest. The photo on my screen was flawless, Derek's white Tesla appearing to be sliced cleanly in half, with both pieces sitting in the parking garage. I'd spent 6 hours perfecting the shadows and lighting to make it absolutely convincing. Derek destroyed his own car because he believed I'd destroyed it first. Then he called you in a panic, which confirmed to me that your yoga class was actually a coordination meeting to plan your next moves. I scrolled to the next photo, which showed Derek in a rage, attacking his perfectly intact car with a crowbar while security cameras recorded everything. The parking garage has excellent surveillance. Derek's little tantrum is now evidence of destruction of property, disturbing the peace, and what Patricia calls consciousness of guilt. Apparently, people don't usually destroy their own property unless they're trying to hide something. Veronica put her head in her hands. He thought you'd actually... Why would you make him think that? Because I wanted to see how he'd react when faced with consequences for his actions. Turns out Derek handles pressure about as well as he handles monogamy. I walked over to the window and looked down at the parking garage. Derek's car was still there, windows smashed, body panels dented, looking like a victim of severe hail damage. A tow truck was hooking it up for removal. The insurance company won't cover intentional damage, especially when it's caught on camera. Derek's looking at about $40,000 in repairs, plus whatever legal fees he'll rack up defending against vandalism charges. My phone buzzed with another text. I glanced at it and chuckled. Derek's been released from the hospital, but his company just suspended him pending an investigation into recent erratic behavior affecting professional relationships. Apparently, having an affair with a married client while destroying your own car raises questions about judgment and stability. Veronica looked up at me with something between horror and admiration. You planned all of this. I adapted to circumstances as they developed. You taught me that flexibility is important in modern relationships. I sat down on my half of the sectional, carefully positioning myself so we could have a conversation without the absurd gap between couch pieces becoming too distracting. For 5 years, you've lectured me about independence, equality, and splitting everything fairly. You've criticized traditional marriage as outdated and oppressive. You've insisted that modern couples need to maintain separate identities and finances. I pulled out a notebook I'd been keeping throughout our marriage. I started documenting your philosophy about 6 months into our relationship. Every time you explained why we needed to keep things separate, every time you criticized couples who shared resources, every lecture about the importance of maintaining independence. I flipped through pages of carefully recorded quotes. Marriage shouldn't change who you are as an individual. That was our 6-month anniversary dinner. Shared bank accounts are a relic of patriarchal control. First Christmas together. Modern women don't need men to take care of them financially. When we were shopping for this apartment, Veronica listened with growing unease as I read back her own words. You were very consistent in your messaging. Independence above all else. Equal splits. No traditional gender roles. I admired your conviction. I closed the notebook and looked directly at her. So, when you announced you wanted a divorce and expected to divide our assets 50-50, I decided to honor your principles completely. No patriarchal assumptions about who gets what, no traditional negotiations, just pure mathematical equality, exactly as you always insisted. She gestured helplessly at the destroyed furniture around us. This isn't what I meant. Then you should have been more specific about your terms. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, stepping carefully around the precise boundary line I'd drawn through the center of the apartment with masking tape. Everything on the left side was hers. Everything on the right side was mine. I've been thinking about our relationship a lot over the past few weeks, I called from my half of the kitchen, trying to understand where things went wrong. I opened the right half of our refrigerator. I'd installed a partition down the middle to ensure equal division of cold storage space. You know what I realized? You never actually wanted equality. You wanted the appearance of equality while maintaining all the advantages of traditional marriage. I pulled out a beer from my half of the refrigerator and walked back to the living room. You kept separate bank accounts, but when you needed expensive medical procedures, I paid for them from our joint account. You insisted on splitting household expenses, but somehow your half always included the decorative items while mine covered utilities and repairs. I popped open the beer and took a sip. You wanted financial independence, but you expected me to cover the shortfall when your spending exceeded your income. You criticized traditional gender roles, but you never once took out the garbage, fixed a leaky faucet, or dealt with the landlord when problems arose. Veronica shifted uncomfortably on her half of the couch. That's not fair. I contributed to this relationship. You did, but not in the ways you claim to value. I pulled out another folder from behind my books. I've been tracking the actual division of labor in our marriage for the past 2 years. The spreadsheet I showed her was exhaustive. Every household task, every bill payment, every errand, every maintenance issue, all color-coded and categorized. Cooking, you handled 23%, mostly reheating takeout. Cleaning, you hired a service and expected me to pay half. Laundry, you did your own. I did mine plus all the household linens. Car maintenance, entirely my responsibility, even though you drove twice as many miles. I flipped to the next page. Financial management. I handled all bill payments, tax preparation, insurance claims, and long-term planning. You handled spending your discretionary income on clothes and restaurants. The numbers painted a clear picture. Despite all her rhetoric about equality and modern relationships, Veronica had defaulted to a fairly traditional division of labor. She handled the social and aesthetic aspects of our life, while I managed everything practical and financial. The only thing you consistently handled independently was your affair with Derek. She flinched at the bluntness of that statement. I want you to know, I continued, that discovering your infidelity wasn't the most painful part of this experience. I set down my beer and leaned forward. The most painful part was realizing that you never actually respected me enough to be honest about what you wanted from our marriage. You spent 5 years lecturing me about modern relationships while secretly conducting a completely traditional affair, lying to your husband while expecting him to provide financial security and emotional support. Veronica's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished. Derek isn't your partner in some revolutionary new approach to relationships. He's just another man you're using to meet needs you couldn't admit you had. When he gets tired of playing the romantic lead in your drama, you'll find someone else to fill the role. I stood up and walked to the window again. The tow truck had finished loading Derek's damaged car and was pulling out of the garage. But here's what I've learned from this experience. I actually do want a traditional marriage. I want shared goals, combined resources, and mutual dependence. I want someone who trusts me enough to build a life together instead of maintaining separate escape plans. I turned back to face her. You've taught me that modern independence is just another form of selfishness. All the talk about equality and fairness was just a way to avoid making real commitments or sacrifices. My phone rang again. This time it was my brother. Hey, Colin? Yeah, I told you this might happen today. She's here now, seeing the results. I listened for a moment. No, everything went exactly as planned. Derek took the bait perfectly. I walked into my half of the bedroom, where Veronica couldn't hear the rest of the conversation. The security footage is already with Patricia. Derek's meltdown, the car damage, everything. Plus, I've got 3 months of financial records showing him spending company money on personal expenses. Those dinners with Veronica weren't legitimate business meetings. I glanced back toward the living room, where Veronica was sitting motionless on her piece of the couch. Yeah, she's finally seeing the whole picture. I think the reality of losing Derek, her job prospects, and half our assets is starting to sink in. I paused. What? No, I'm not taking any pleasure in this. It's just necessary. I hung up and returned to the living room. Veronica looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Was that your lawyer? My brother. He's been helping me document everything for the past month. Colin's a forensic accountant. He specializes in tracking financial fraud and hidden assets. I sat back down and pulled out yet another folder. Colin discovered some interesting patterns in Derek's expense reports. Apparently, he's been billing his company for your romantic dinners by claiming they were client development meetings. That's fraud. Veronica's face went white. The pharmaceutical company Derek works for has a zero-tolerance policy for expense account abuse. They're launching a full investigation into his billing practices. Colin estimates Derek's been overcharging them by about $15,000 over the past 6 months. I opened the folder and showed her printouts of Derek's expense reports, alongside credit card statements. Every dinner at Le Bernardin, every weekend getaway, every gift he bought you, all billed to his employer as legitimate business expenses. The paper trail is remarkably thorough. She stared at the documents with growing horror. I didn't know he was doing that, but you benefited from it. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, jewelry, all funded by corporate fraud. That makes you an accessory. I pulled out a legal document. Patricia thinks we can use this to strengthen our divorce case. Not only were you conducting an affair, but you were knowingly accepting gifts purchased with stolen money? Veronica grabbed the papers and scanned them frantically. These dates? This isn't possible. Derek said he was paying for everything out of his own salary. Derek lied to you about his finances the same way you lied to me about your relationship. Apparently, dishonesty is a shared value in your relationship. I took the papers back and returned them to the folder. The irony is that Derek's fraud investigation will probably destroy his career, which means he won't be able to provide the lifestyle you've become accustomed to. You're losing a husband who could support you financially and a boyfriend who can't. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. I read it and smiled. Derek just fired his lawyer. Apparently, the legal fees for defending against both the vandalism charges and the fraud investigation exceed his available cash. His company has also frozen his bank accounts pending the outcome of their internal review. I showed Veronica the message. Patricia suggests we offer Derek a deal. If he provides a full written confession about the affair and the expense account fraud, we'll agree not to pursue criminal charges for the car incident. Veronica looked confused. What car incident? You said you didn't actually damage his car. I didn't. But Derek doesn't know that. As far as he's concerned, I somehow managed to perfectly slice his car in half without leaving any tool marks, fingerprints, or other evidence. He's probably wondering how I accomplished such a precise cut without anyone seeing me. I pulled up another photo on my phone. This is what Derek's car actually looked like before his meltdown. The image showed his Tesla sitting normally in the parking space, completely intact and undamaged. I hired a professional photographer to take this shot from multiple angles an hour before I sent Derek the fake images. When the insurance investigators compare the before and after photos, they'll see that all the damage was self-inflicted. Veronica stared at the photo, then at me. You documented everything. I documented everything that mattered. Derek's panic reaction, his destruction of his own property, the timeline of events. I've got enough evidence to prove he damaged his own car in a fit of rage after receiving my message. I scrolled to another image, a screenshot of the text message I'd sent to Derek. Saw your car this morning. Looks like someone split it in half. Guess that's what happens when you split other people's marriages. Technically accurate. Someone did split his car in half. Derek himself, with a crowbar. The cleverness of the manipulation was starting to dawn on her. You made him destroy his own car. I provided him with information and allowed him to draw his own conclusions. His reaction revealed everything I needed to know about his character and his relationship with you. I finished my beer and set the bottle carefully on my half of the coffee table. A man with a clear conscience would have called the police to report vandalism. Derek's first instinct was to call you for damage control, then destroy evidence. That tells me everything about the kind of person he is and the kind of relationship you two have built. Veronica sat in silence for several minutes, processing the scope of what had happened. Finally, she looked up at me with something like awe. You destroyed both of our lives. I revealed the truth about both of your lives. The destruction was always there. You just kept it hidden under layers of lies and financial fraud. I stood up and walked to the window one more time. The parking garage was empty now, except for my own car, sitting exactly where I'd left it. Derek will probably face criminal charges for the expense account fraud. His career in pharmaceuticals is over. Companies don't hire people with embezzlement convictions. You'll be implicated as an accessory, which means your sales career is probably finished too. I turned back to face her. The two of you will have to build new lives without the stolen money that funded your romance. Let's see how much you really care about each other when you're both unemployed and facing legal bills. My phone rang yet again. This time it was Patricia. Hello, Patricia. Yes, I'm with Veronica now. I listened for a moment. Excellent. Derek signed the confession, the full confession. Veronica's eyes widened. And he's agreed to testify about the timeline of the affair in exchange for reduced charges on the fraud case? Outstanding. I hung up and turned back to my wife. Derek just threw you under the bus. He's claiming the affair was entirely your idea, that you manipulated him into paying for expensive dinners by convincing him they were legitimate business networking opportunities. She stood up so fast, she nearly knocked over her half of the coffee table. That's not true. Derek pursued me. He's the one who suggested we meet outside of work. I believe you, but Derek's version will be entered into evidence as part of his plea agreement. He gets reduced charges for cooperation, and you get portrayed as a manipulative seductress who corrupted an innocent businessman. I handed her another business card. You're going to need your own attorney. I'd recommend someone with experience in fraud cases, since Derek's testimony will likely trigger an investigation into your own expense accounts. Veronica took the card with numb fingers. My expense accounts are clean. Are they? Because Colin found some interesting patterns in your pharmaceutical sales reports. A lot of dinners with doctors that happen to coincide with your meetings with Derek. Same restaurants, same dates, but different supposed clients. I pulled out another spreadsheet. Either you're the most efficient pharmaceutical rep in history, conducting multiple client meetings simultaneously, or you've been double billing your company for personal expenses the same way Derek did. She stared at the data with growing comprehension. Those were legitimate business dinners. Then you won't have any trouble explaining to your company's internal audit team why Dr. Patterson from Mount Sinai Hospital has no record of meeting with you on the 17 occasions you claimed to have dinner meetings with him. The color drained from her face. How did you get access to doctors' schedules? Colin's investigation was very thorough. It turns out that most of the doctors you claim to meet with have detailed calendar systems and administrative assistants who keep careful records. None of them remember having dinner with you on the dates you submitted for reimbursement. I sat back down on my half of the couch. Your company is going to want answers about where their money actually went. And when they compare your expense reports to Derek's, they're going to see a clear pattern of coordinated fraud. Veronica slumped back onto her piece of the sectional. We just wanted to spend time together. Derek said it was normal for sales reps to be creative with expense categorization. Derek lied to you about what was normal and acceptable. Just like he lied about his finances, his intentions, and his willingness to take responsibility when things went wrong. I pulled out my phone and showed her Derek's signed confession. According to this document, you were the mastermind behind the entire scheme. Derek claims you taught him how to manipulate expense categories and suggested specific restaurants that would be easy to justify as business meetings. She read the confession with increasing desperation. This is all backwards. Derek was the one with experience at his company. He knew their policies and procedures. I just followed his lead. That's a believable story. You should practice telling it to your lawyer. I stood up and walked toward my half of the bedroom. I'm going to pack my things now. The lease is in both our names, but since you'll probably be unemployed within the week, I doubt you'll be able to afford the rent on your own. I paused in the doorway. I've already arranged for a storage unit to hold my half of our possessions. The furniture we destroyed will be hauled away tomorrow. You can keep whatever's left. Consider it my gift to help you start your new independent life. 20 minutes later, I emerged from the bedroom with 2 suitcases and a box of personal items. Veronica was still sitting on her piece of the couch, staring at Derek's confession. Where will you go? She asked without looking up. I've rented a furnished apartment across town. Month-to-month lease until the divorce is finalized. It's small, but it's entirely mine. No shared assets to split. I set my bags by the door and walked back to where she was sitting. I want you to know that I don't hate you, Veronica. I'm disappointed, but not surprised. You've been telling me exactly who you are for 5 years. I just finally started listening. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I never meant for any of this to happen. You meant for all of it to happen. You just didn't mean to get caught. I pulled out one final document and placed it on the coffee table between the two halves. Divorce papers. Patricia prepared them based on Derek's confession and the financial evidence. No-fault divorce with equal division of assets. Exactly what you originally requested. She picked up the papers and scanned the first page. What about the destroyed furniture, the damaged property? Itemized and valued at 50% of replacement cost. We'll each take a loss on our taxes for the destroyed items. Fair and equal. Just like you wanted. I picked up my bags and headed for the door. Derek's testimony means you'll probably avoid criminal charges if you cooperate with the investigation into your expense reports. Patricia recommends full disclosure and voluntary restitution. It'll be expensive, but cheaper than prison. I opened the door and paused. One last thing. When Derek gets out of legal trouble and starts looking for a new girlfriend, remember that he responded to pressure by immediately betraying you to save himself. That's who he really is when things get difficult. I stepped into the hallway and looked back at the apartment one more time. Veronica was still sitting on her half of the sectional, surrounded by the precise chaos I'd created. I hope you find what you're actually looking for, I said, but I don't think it's equality. I closed the door and walked toward the elevator, leaving behind 5 years of marriage and a lifetime of illusions about modern relationships. 3 weeks later, I was settled into my new apartment when Colin called with an update. Derek's company fired him yesterday, he reported. Full termination with cause, no severance, no benefits, and they're pursuing restitution for the fraudulent expenses. I put him on speaker while I unpacked the last box of books. What about Veronica? Her company is being more lenient. They're offering voluntary resignation with partial restitution instead of termination and prosecution. She'll have to pay back about $12,000, but she avoids criminal charges. I arranged my books on the new shelves I'd bought. Simple, unadorned, designed for functionality rather than aesthetics. And their relationship, Colin chuckled. According to my source at Derek's company, Veronica hasn't spoken to him since he signed the confession. Apparently, she's telling people he manipulated her into the affair and then abandoned her when things got complicated. Which is probably true in its own way. Derek's narrative is even better. He's claiming the whole thing was Veronica's idea from the beginning. Says she seduced him as part of some elaborate plan to advance her career and steal company resources. I paused in my unpacking. That's remarkably creative. The beauty is that they're both probably right. Derek was manipulative and opportunistic. Veronica was deceptive and mercenary. They each brought out the worst in each other and then turned on each other the moment they faced consequences. I opened the last box, which contained my collection of programming books. Dry, technical manuals about clean code and efficient algorithms. Tools for building things that actually worked the way they were supposed to. Any word on the divorce proceedings? Patricia says it should be finalized within 6 weeks. Veronica's lawyer tried to contest the equal division of assets, claiming emotional distress and arguing that the destruction of furniture constituted domestic abuse. How did that go? Poorly. The judge reviewed all the evidence, including Derek's confession, the expense account fraud, and the recordings you made of Veronica explicitly demanding equal splits of everything. The request was denied. I shelved my programming books alongside my collection of woodworking manuals. I'd started building furniture in my spare time, simple, functional pieces that served their intended purpose without pretense or hidden agenda. So she gets exactly what she asked for. Better than what she asked for, actually. You're not pursuing restitution for the fraudulent expenses she benefited from, and you're not contesting her right to keep the destroyed furniture for parts or disposal. Most judges would have awarded you additional compensation for her deception. I walked to the window of my new apartment. It faced east toward the mountains instead of down into a parking garage. The morning light was warmer here, more natural. I don't want additional compensation. I want closure. You're getting that too. Derek's credit is destroyed, his career is over, and he's facing years of legal debt. Veronica's unemployed, financially damaged, and discovering that her modern approach to relationships leaves her completely alone when things get difficult. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and smiled. Speaking of closure, I have a dinner date tonight. Anyone interesting? A woman I met at the bookstore last week. She's a librarian who believes in shared goals and combined resources. Very traditional values. I looked around my new apartment. Small, simple, designed for building rather than splitting. We're going to cook dinner together and split the cost of groceries. But not because we believe in radical independence, because we believe in working together toward common goals. Colin laughed. Sounds revolutionary. It is, in its own way. Turns out that real equality means sharing responsibilities instead of avoiding them. Who knew? After I hung up, I spent the evening preparing for my date with Catherine. She was everything Veronica wasn't. Straightforward about her intentions, honest about her needs, interested in building something permanent rather than maintaining escape routes. We'd met when I was buying a book about furniture restoration, and she'd recommended a better guide from the library's collection. Our first conversation lasted 2 hours and covered everything from career goals to family values to financial philosophy. She wanted marriage, children, and shared bank accounts. She thought separate bedrooms were ridiculous and prenups were romantic poison. I want someone I can trust completely, she'd told me over coffee the previous weekend. Someone who sees marriage as a partnership rather than a business arrangement. Catherine arrived at 7 o'clock with ingredients for homemade pasta and a bottle of wine to share. We cooked together in my small kitchen, laughing at my inexperience with fresh herbs and her tendency to oversalt everything. I used to be married to someone who insisted we split every ingredient cost, I told her while we worked on the sauce. She'd keep receipts and calculate who owed what down to the penny. Catherine paused in her stirring. That sounds exhausting. It was. I spent 5 years trying to prove I believed in equality by treating my wife like a roommate with benefits. We carried our plates to the small dining table I'd built the previous weekend. Simple pine construction, designed to last decades rather than impress visitors. What changed your mind? Catherine asked. She had an affair with someone who shared her views on independence and modern relationships. Turned out their equality was just an excuse to avoid making real commitments to each other. I poured wine into glasses I'd bought specifically for sharing meals with someone else. I realized I'd been confusing fairness with fear. All that talk about equal splits and financial independence was really just a way to avoid risking genuine vulnerability. Catherine reached across the table and took my hand. I want to be vulnerable with someone. I want to build something together that neither of us could create alone. We spent the rest of the evening talking about shared dreams and combined resources. She wanted children. I wanted stability. She believed in joint bank accounts. I believed in family planning. We both wanted marriage that meant partnership rather than parallel independence. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Veronica's number. "Excuse me," I told Catherine, stepping into the kitchen to take the call. "Hello, Veronica. I need to ask you something." Her voice was small, defeated. "Derek won't return my calls. His phone goes straight to voicemail." I leaned against the counter, looking out at Catherine reading one of my woodworking magazines. "What did you expect? I thought he might still care about me. After everything we went through together. You went through an affair together. That's not the same as building a relationship." I could hear her crying on the other end of the line. "I lost my job today. The company decided voluntary resignation wasn't enough. They're pursuing full restitution and criminal charges for expense account fraud." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you? Really?" I considered the question seriously. "Yes, I am. I never wanted you to suffer. I just wanted you to face consequences for your choices." Catherine looked up from her magazine and smiled at me. I smiled back, feeling the warmth of being with someone who wanted to share rather than split. "I don't understand how everything went wrong so fast," Veronica continued. 6 months ago, I had a job, a marriage, and a future with Derek. Now I have nothing. You have freedom, complete independence, no shared responsibilities or mutual obligations. Isn't that what you always wanted?" There was a long pause. "I never actually wanted to be alone. But you wanted the option to be alone whenever it became convenient. You wanted marriage without commitment, partnership without vulnerability, love without risk." I walked back toward the dining room, where Catherine was setting her magazine aside and preparing to help with the dishes. "Derek offered you the same thing. Excitement without responsibility, romance without commitment. When reality intruded, both of you immediately looked for exit strategies. I thought I loved him. You loved the idea of him, just like you loved the idea of modern marriage and financial independence. But ideas don't keep you warm at night or stand by you when things get difficult." Catherine began clearing our plates, moving efficiently around my small kitchen with the ease of someone who understood that shared work was a privilege rather than an imposition. "What should I do now?" Veronica asked. "Build something real with someone who wants to build it with you. Stop looking for relationships that preserve your escape routes and start looking for someone worth staying with." I walked over to help Catherine with the dishes, sharing the work without calculating who owed what. "And Veronica, learn to cook. Real relationships require real skills, not just good intentions and separate bank accounts." I hung up and turned my attention to the woman standing beside me at the sink, washing dishes from our first shared meal. "Everything okay?" Catherine asked. "Everything's perfect," I replied, meaning it completely. 6 months later, Catherine and I moved in together, to an apartment with our names on a shared lease, shared bank accounts, and a shared vision of the future. We split the household work based on preference and ability, rather than rigid equality. She handled the cooking and financial planning because she enjoyed them. I handled the repairs and furniture building because they came naturally to me. When we got engaged a year later, we chose a single ring instead of matching sets, planned a shared honeymoon instead of separate bachelor parties, and opened joint accounts for all our major expenses. Our wedding vows included promises to combine our resources, share our burdens, and build a life that neither of us could create alone. Veronica sent a card to our wedding. Inside, she'd written, "I hope you both get what you're actually looking for." Catherine read the card and smiled. What does she mean by that? She means she hopes we succeed where she failed, that we figure out the difference between equality and partnership. I looked around at our wedding reception, friends and family who'd supported us through the process of building something together rather than protecting individual interests. "I think we already have." Catherine squeezed my hand and kissed me in front of everyone we cared about. It was the kind of public display of commitment that Veronica would have criticized as outdated and possessive. To Catherine and me, it was simply honest. When we got home that night, we hung our wedding photo on the wall of our shared bedroom, not divided in half, not carefully measured for equal representation, but displayed as a single image of a partnership that was stronger than the sum of its parts. Derek sent a message 3 years later when Catherine and I announced our first pregnancy. His text was simple. "Congratulations on building something that lasts." I showed the message to Catherine, who was reading baby books while planning our shared parenting responsibilities. "Do you think he learned anything from what happened?" she asked. "I think he learned that real relationships require real commitments. Whether he's capable of making them is a different question." I put my hand on Catherine's growing belly, feeling our baby move beneath my palm. The difference between us and them was never about equality versus tradition. It was about building versus protecting. They spent their energy maintaining exit strategies. We spend ours building something worth staying for. Catherine closed her book and leaned against my shoulder. I'm glad you learned the difference. I'm glad you taught me the difference. We sat together in our shared living room, surrounded by furniture I'd built and decorations she'd chosen, planning for a future that belonged to both of us equally. Not because we'd split everything in half, but because we'd created something that was indivisibly ours. Years later, when our children asked about our previous marriages, Catherine had also been married once before, to someone who treated partnership like a business arrangement, we told them the truth about the difference between splitting and sharing. Splitting means protecting yourself from loss, Catherine would explain. Sharing means accepting risk because the potential gain is worth it. Some people are so afraid of losing half of what they have, I'd add, that they never discover what they could build with someone else. Our children grew up understanding that marriage meant combining resources rather than dividing them, that equality meant shared burdens rather than separate accounts, and that real independence came from choosing someone trustworthy rather than maintaining constant escape routes. Veronica never remarried. Derek eventually found someone else who shared his views on modern relationships and financial independence. They lived together for 2 years before breaking up over a disagreement about splitting the cost of vacation rentals. Catherine and I built something that lasted because we understood the difference between fairness and partnership, between equality and love, between splitting everything equally and sharing everything completely. The irony wasn't lost on me that learning to truly share had required first experiencing someone who insisted on dividing everything. Sometimes you have to see the perfect mathematical precision of a failed relationship to understand the beautiful chaos of a successful one. When Veronica had said she wanted to split everything, she'd meant it as a way to protect herself from risk. When I'd taken her literally, I'd shown her what that protection actually cost. But when Catherine and I chose to share everything, we discovered what we could build when protection mattered less than partnership, when commitment mattered more than escape routes, and when love mattered enough to risk everything for the chance to create something that belonged completely to both of us. In the end, the difference between splitting and sharing wasn't mathematical at all. It was the difference between fear and faith, between protecting what you had and building what you could become together. And that difference had made all the difference.